Secretary Buttigieg, I've been driving an electric car for 10 years, and I've had solar panels for 15 years, and I'm really bullish on technology and the way it could help make our country energy independent or more energy independent. But I'm really alarmed at sort of the naivete of those who are promoting rapid adoption of these technologies with our existing infrastructure. President Biden signed a non-binding executive order stating that 50% of vehicles sold in the United States should be electric by 2030. Do you support that?
Yes.
And he also said that by 2035 that 100% of the federal government fleet should be electric. Do you support that?
Yes.
So, which uses more electricity? We're talking about residential electricity here. A refrigerator when it's running or an electric car when it's charging in your garage?
I would expect a car.
Would you say it uses twice as much or 25 times as much?
I would think closer to 25 times as much. Yeah.
It's actually 50 at the instantaneous moment, but over the course of a year, if I take the numbers from the U.S. Department of Energy about the average household, how many vehicles they own and how far they drive, over the course of a year, an American household would use 25 times as much electricity for their electric car as they would for their refrigerator if they had 100% adoption. And the average family has 2 vehicles, and this would be if the average family had 2 electric vehicles. Do you think it would strain the grid if everybody plugged in 25 refrigerators in every household?
Well, if we didn't make any upgrades to the grid, sure. I mean, if we had yesterday's grid with tomorrow's cars, it's not going to work. It's one of the reasons why we believe that infrastructure includes electrical infrastructure and argued for that to be included, as it thankfully was in the bipartisan law.
Do you think by 2030, which is when Biden says 50% of cars sold should be electric, do you think the grid will be capable of handling electric cars?
It's going to need to be, and we're working with the Department of Energy every day. We've established a joint office of energy and transportation to map out some of the needs. Obviously, some of this gets outside of my lane, and we've been discussing with, for example, the truck stops that are looking at what their power needs would need to be at an interchange where today they're mainly filling up on gas in order to accommodate that. And then, as you mentioned, a lot of the scenario for this is also residential. But it's also worth pointing out that while a typical driver who adopts electric is using more electricity, at the end of the day, they're using less energy because of the efficiency benefits of getting that energy produced at utilities.
The problem is we don't have the capacity to produce that energy. You aptly use the word need. You could say want as well. There's needs and wants to make this fantasy work by 2030, but the reality is the capability is not going to be there. The average household uses 17% of their electricity for air conditioning. And that would mean the average household uses 1,870 kilowatt hours per year for air conditioning. If that average household plugged in electric cars, do you know how much more electricity they would use in comparison to the air conditioning that air conditions their whole house?
No, but again, I would emphasize it will
Let me help you with that first before we go on, because the numbers are important. It would take 4 times as much electricity to charge the average household's cars as the average household uses on air conditioning. Do you think that could be? So if we reach the goal by 2030 that Biden has of 50% adoption instead of 100% adoption, that means the average household would use twice as much electricity charging one of their cars as they would use for all of the air conditioning that they use for the entire year. Do you think this could contribute to rolling blackouts and brownouts in areas of the country where air conditioning is basically considered essential?
Not if we prepare. Look, the fact that people who have electric vehicles are going to use more electricity can't be a reason to give up. The idea that America is inferior to the other countries that have figured this out just doesn't sit well with us in administration, and that's why we're investing in a better grid.
In the time that I have left, let me say, I'm not saying we shouldn't prepare. I told you at the beginning of this, I'm bullish on this technology, but the numbers and the rate of adoption has been developed using political science, not engineering. They're impractical, and if we blindly follow these goals that Biden has set out, it will cause pain and suffering for the middle class. And I yield back.
Hey, Mr. President, it's great to see you.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. We've got members of your economic and energy team here, and we're prepared to start the briefing, but we'll start by turning the floor over to you, sir.
Well, thanks. Let me start by apologizing for my voice. I'm feeling much better than I sound. You know, we're meeting today on gas prices, and we have some really good news. Gas prices are coming down. In fact, gas prices have fallen every day this summer for 38 days in a row. Now, you know, you can find gas for $3.99 or less in more than 30,000 gas stations in more than 35 states. In some cities, it's down almost $1 from last month. We've been working really hard to bring the price down. 4 months ago, I gave an order to release 1 million barrels of oil per day, for our nation, from our nation's strategic petroleum reserve. And I led the world to coordinate the largest release of oil reserves in history, including from other countries. In total, more than 240 million barrels to boost global supply. During that time, I've also been working to increase U.S. production. Today, we're producing 12 million barrels per day, and we're on track to hit a near record highs. I've been working to make sure that when the price of oil comes down, the price at the pump comes down as well, and comes down in real time. The good news is that's happening, but it's not happening fast enough. We've made progress, but prices are still too high. And so here's what I'm going to do, talk about today with all of you. We need to work on this. First, we're going to look at ways to increase oil production from the existing wells and permits that exist today. The industry has more approved permits for production on federal lands than they can possibly use. That's a fact. Let me say it again. They have more than they can use. So my message to these companies is use the permits or lose them. Don't say we can't, you don't have access. Second, I'm telling the industry, you're making record profits due to Putin's war in Ukraine. Use those profits to increase production and refining. Don't use those profits to buy back your stocks and dividends. Look, thirdly, we'll talk about the global price cap on Russian oil that I got our partners to agree to last month at the G7. That'll keep supply up and Putin's revenues down. In the days and weeks ahead, I'm going to keep doing what I can to bring down the price of gas at the pump. But the real answer is to get to a clean energy economy as soon as possible. Turn this into something positive. That means cleaner renewable energy, more affordable electric vehicles, and clean energy manufactured here in the United States. That's how we'll protect the climate and create jobs. I'll have more to say about this in our discussions, and more in the coming days.
Given to 7 states. The 7 states were mostly red states. And with Alabama, Texas, Florida.
Well,
Georgia,
why is that, though?
And
why is that?
I understand that the Biden administration was trying to even up the ground for the other states, since these red states, 7 red states, including Florida.
Well, but why was that the case? So the question is, last summer there were a handful of states, and he's terming them red states. I don't know why that would matter. Who had the Delta wave was a southern wave. It hit the South in a seasonal pattern, just like 2020 was a seasonal pattern. Now you're seeing a seasonal wave in the Northeast. And as much as people like you would like to say this is based on your political affiliation, that's not how viral curves work. So we were using more of it because we had more prevalence, but I'd say just as significantly, we actually embraced the treatment. I was attacked when we rolled out this monoclonal site by press outlets, by the left. They were attacking me for doing it. They acted like it was like voodoo, that this wasn't something that was, and then what you saw is people were getting the treatment, they'd tell their friends, their neighbors, all of a sudden people were going out, and this was a big thing in Florida because people saw the results of it. So that is why we were using more. Now you're in a situation where you have massive prevalence in places like DC and New York and all those other places. They are getting more. But, you know, they haven't embraced it the way that we do. But here's what my question would be. Why are we even in a situation where we are concerned about who gets what? We've had these available for over a year. Why aren't there enough? If the federal government has taken control of this, why didn't they ensure that there would be plentiful supply of this to be able to keep people from being hospitalized because of COVID? Why were they asleep at the switch on that? Why not do it? And why, especially after you saw the positive effect it had in dealing with Delta in the southern states, why wouldn't you have done it? And look, they're under no obligation in some respects to to purchase this on their own. But when they don't let us do it, when they have these exclusive agreements, then that's a huge problem. So let us buy some. We will buy some. We bought as much Sotrovimab as we could. That's now off the table. So let's just be real here. The fact that we're even talking about over a year, this stuff came out in December of 2020 under EUA. Sotrovimab came out in the spring of 2021 under EUA. There's plentiful time for them to have gotten this in gear. And I think the fact that they haven't is part of it. They don't believe in the treatment. They said, remember, Fauci said if 50% get vaxxed, there'll be no more waves. Well, we have way more than that across the country, and you have some of the biggest waves you've seen yet. So that was wrong, but they're not willing to pivot to the treatments, and I just think that that's unfortunate. But why you would try to play politics with it? The people that are coming to get treatments, like, you say red state or not, how do you know? I mean, is that person either way? I mean, that's just not the way to think about it.
I apologize for saying red states, but these have been states that have been very resistant to vaccines and masks.
That's not true. First of all, that's not true. Florida over the summer and today has had higher vaccination rate than the U.S. as a whole. That's just the fact. We've had the highest in the Southeast for pretty much the whole time. We have over 90% of our elderly population for many months has had vaccination. The fact of the matter is the vast majority of people who get monoclonal treatments have been vaccinated. I know that doesn't fit the narrative. Go down and look at the Miami-Dade site. They actually put it out every day. How many people got treatments? How many were vaxxed versus not vaxxed? And it's always 2, 3, 4 to 1 vaxxed to unvaxxed. So that's just the reality. And so to use the vaccine as a reason to deny treatment or our policies regarding, and let's be honest, they wanted mandatory vaccinations. That's what they were pushing for. Passports to where you can't go into a restaurant. I mean, a 5-year-old kid can't go someplace because he hasn't done this. The clinical trial for 5 to 11-year-olds for Pfizer found no severe COVID outcomes for either the vaccine arm or the control arm. Nobody got severe COVID in that clinical trial, and it was not a very big clinical trial. And so, okay, not one severe case, so why would you deny a kid the ability to do it? But that's what they wanted to do. They wanted it to be mandatory to even send a kid to school with COVID vaccine. They wanted a whole bunch of other policies, and we resisted that. They wanted people to lose their jobs. If they had their way, you would have police officers fired because of this choice. Firefighters would be terminated because of this choice. Nurses, we've stood up for nurses and saved a lot of jobs. So Florida did that. We were one of the few states that stood up and said, we are not going to deny you the ability to earn a living based off your choice on a shot. And that is much different than, I think, what you've seen from the federal leadership. But here we are looking at it now. Clearly those heavy-handed policies have not worked, because if they did work, they would not be dealing with any significant COVID right now. And so we just have to understand that, and what great cost have they imposed on our social fabric, on our economy, on people's conception of their individual rights. I mean, it has been a disaster. But even putting that aside, the fact that we approached it different from a mandate perspective is not a basis to deny treatment to Floridians who may need it. So Joe's going to keep fighting, I'm going to keep fighting, we're all going to keep fighting. We have the infrastructure in place. If those shipments come, there'll be another site in Jacksonville the next day. If they come, there'll be sites in South Florida, Central Florida, all across. We're ready. The legislature, we got the money. We have money set aside. We're ready. But we can't do it. We can't give people treatments if the federal government's withholding the treatments. So send us the treatments and let's get it done. Okay, we got to run. Come on, buddy.
I have one question. One more question, Doctor.